The sharp click of heels against the polished marble floor echoed through the conference room, each step reverberating with the weight of 35 years. The air was thick with anticipation as board members shuffled papers and exchanged knowing glances. At the head of the table, Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the tense atmosphere like a knife. "We've gathered here today to discuss some important changes in our company structure," he began, his tone formal and detached. "After careful consideration, we've decided to restructure several key positions within our organization." She sat at the far end of the elongated table, her weathered hands resting lightly on the surface. The morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows caught the silver threads in her hair, illuminating decades of dedication etched into every line of her face. Her name was Margaret, though everyone simply called her Maggie, a name that had become synonymous with reliability and wisdom within these walls. Maggie's heart thudded against her ribcage as she watched Mr. Thompson's lips move, forming words that seemed to dance just beyond her comprehension. 35 years. She'd started in this company as a young woman fresh out of college, full of dreams and determination. She'd poured her soul into every project, mentored countless employees, and helped steer the company through its most challenging times. Now, at 62, she'd been promised this moment, the culmination of her life's work. "As part of our restructuring," Mr. Thompson continued, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of finality, "we must make some difficult decisions. Some of our long-term employees, while valuable, may not be the best fit for our new direction." He paused, letting his words sink into the silence. "Margaret, your service has been commendable, but we feel it's time for you to pursue other opportunities." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Maggie's fingers gripped the edge of the table as reality crashed over her like a tidal wave. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not after everything. Her mind raced back to all those late nights spent perfecting presentations, the weekend sacrifice to meet deadlines, the personal sacrifices made in the name of corporate loyalty. And now, they were dismissing her like yesterday's news. "You can't be serious," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. The board members avoided her gaze, their expressions ranging from discomfort to indifference. Mr. Thompson's eyes finally met hers, and she saw it then, the truth behind his carefully constructed facade. He didn't know. None of them did. In that moment of clarity, memories flooded back, documents signed decades ago, shares transferred quietly during her father's tenure as CEO, legal papers locked away in her home office. The 20% ownership stake that had been her birthright, her safety net, her secret weapon. All these years, she'd chosen to lead by example rather than title, to earn respect through merit rather than privilege. But now, faced with such profound betrayal, she wondered if her humility had been a mistake. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she sat, being fired from a company where she held significant ownership, by people who couldn't see beyond their own ambition. The same company she'd practically raised from its awkward adolescent years into the powerhouse it was today. The same company whose culture she'd helped shape, whose values she'd helped define, whose success she'd helped secure through blood, sweat, and tears. As the meeting droned on around her, Margaret found herself studying the faces of her colleagues, some she'd hired personally, others she'd trained and mentored. Young faces filled with promise and potential, yet marred by the same blind ambition that had consumed Mr. Thompson and his cronies. She thought about the countless times she'd stayed late to help struggling employees, the personal investments she'd made in their careers, the network of support she'd built throughout the organization. Her eyes fell upon Sarah, the young marketing manager who'd come to her in tears just last month, worried about balancing her career with motherhood. Margaret had been there, offering guidance born from her own experiences, sharing the wisdom that only comes with age and struggle. And now, what would happen to Sarah and the others like her? Would they too face similar betrayals when their usefulness ran out? The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every woman who had ever been told she was too old, too set in her ways, too expensive to keep around. Every employee who had given their all only to be discarded when convenient. Every dream that had been crushed under the weight of corporate greed. As Mr. Thompson droned on about severance packages and exit strategies, Margaret felt something shift inside her. The initial shock gave way to a slow-burning anger, tempered by 3 decades of professional grace. She straightened her spine, feeling the weight of her years not as a burden but as armor. The papers before her blurred as tears threatened, but she blinked them back, refusing to give these people the satisfaction of seeing her break. Her mind raced through possibilities, scenarios, and strategies. The shares tucked away in her safe deposit box weren't just pieces of paper, they were power. They represented her family's legacy, her right to a voice in the company's future. For years, she'd kept them hidden, believing that true leadership came from influence rather than authority. But perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to remind these so-called visionaries who really held the reins. Before we proceed, she interrupted, her voice stronger now, commanding attention despite the chaos swirling inside her. There are some matters I believe need clarification. Perhaps we should adjourn to my office. After all, it's been in my family for generations. The room fell silent, the implication hanging heavy in the air. Mr. Thompson's face paled as understanding dawned. The board members exchanged nervous glances, their earlier confidence visibly shaken. Margaret allowed herself a small bitter smile as she gathered her belongings. 35 years of memories, of battles fought and won, of lives touched and changed, none of it would be forgotten. Not today. Not ever. The walk to her office felt like a lifetime, each step resonating with the echoes of her past triumphs. She could hear the hurried footsteps of Mr. Thompson and the board members trailing behind her, their earlier bravado replaced by uncertainty. As she approached her door, she paused, running her fingers over the brass nameplate that had borne her family name for decades. The cool metal felt reassuring under her touch, grounding her in this moment of revelation. Inside, the familiar surroundings offered little comfort. The walls were lined with awards and photographs documenting her journey through the company's history. There was the picture of her standing beside her father on her first day, both of them smiling with hope and anticipation. Another showed her accepting an industry award, her team cheering behind her. Each frame told a story of dedication, of obstacles overcome, of victories earned through hard work and perseverance. Yet today, these trophies felt hollow, their significance diminished by the betrayal unfolding in real time. Margaret moved to her desk, her movements deliberate and measured. She unlocked the bottom drawer, her fingers trembling slightly as she retrieved a worn leather portfolio. The document inside hadn't seen daylight in years, but its contents had shaped her entire career. As she laid it open, she caught sight of her reflection in the window, a woman transformed. Gone was the vulnerable employee facing termination, in her place stood someone else entirely. Someone who understood the true value of power and how to wield it wisely. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about ownership and loyalty," she said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You see, when my father passed the torch to me, he didn't just leave me with responsibilities. He left me with a legacy. 20% of this company belongs to me, and through me, to the values he instilled in this organization." The gasps that followed were almost comical in their predictability. Mr. Thompson stumbled backward, his chair scraping against the floor as he tried to process this revelation. The board members exchanged panicked looks, their earlier certainty crumbling like sandcastles against the tide. Margaret watched them with a mixture of sadness and satisfaction, recognizing in their faces the same fear she'd felt just minutes ago. "This isn't about revenge," she continued, her voice softening slightly. "This is about integrity. About remembering why we're here, what this company stands for beyond quarterly profits and stock prices. I've watched generations of employees pass through these halls, each one leaving their mark, contributing to our collective success. And now you want to erase that history, to discard it like so much unnecessary baggage." She rose from her seat, moving to stand before the window that overlooked the city skyline. "I remember when we launched our diversity initiative in the early 2000s. You all thought it was too ambitious, too costly. But I pushed for it because I knew it was the right thing to do. Look at us now, one of the most inclusive companies in the industry. That's the kind of legacy I'm talking about. The kind of impact that lasts beyond balance sheets and annual reports." Turning back to face them, Margaret noticed the subtle shift in their demeanor. The arrogance had melted away, replaced by genuine concern and in some cases, shame. "I've made mistakes, certainly. We all have. But I've learned from each one, using those lessons to build something better. Something sustainable. Something worth fighting for." Her gaze settled on Mr. Thompson, who now looked like a chastised schoolboy. "When you joined this company 5 years ago, fresh from your MBA program, I took you under my wing. I taught you everything I know about leadership, about maintaining our core values while embracing necessary change. And this is how you repay that trust? By trying to erase everything we've built together." The room grew heavy with unspoken truths. Margaret could see the wheels turning in their minds, calculating the implications of her revelation. Power dynamics were shifting before their eyes, and they knew it. Yet beneath the tactical considerations lay something more fundamental, the recognition of human dignity, of respect earned through years of unwavering commitment. "I've been thinking about retirement lately," she admitted, surprising even herself with the admission. "Not because I'm tired or ready to stop contributing, but because I want to mentor the next generation of leaders. To pass on what I've learned, just as my father did for me. But not like this. Not through forced removal and corporate politics." She crossed back to her desk, retrieving another folder. "These are letters of recommendation for several employees who deserve recognition. People you've overlooked in your quest for new blood. I want you to read them carefully, consider what they represent. Experience isn't a liability, it's an asset. Wisdom isn't outdated, it's essential. And loyalty shouldn't be rewarded with betrayal." The sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to grow warmer, filling the room with golden light that illuminated every corner. Margaret felt a strange sense of peace settling over her, despite the turmoil of the morning. She'd entered this room expecting celebration, only to find confrontation. Yet somehow, through the pain and shock, she discovered something more valuable than any promotion, her voice. "The choice is yours," she said finally. "We can continue down this path of destruction, or we can work together to build something better. Something that honors our past while embracing our future. But understand this, I will fight for what's right. For the employees who've given their best years to this company. For the values that made us great. And for the legacy that deserves preservation." As the words hung in the air, Margaret realized she was no longer just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every person who had ever been dismissed, underestimated, or betrayed by those in power. For every dream that had been crushed under the weight of corporate greed. For every voice that had been silenced by ambition. And in that moment of clarity, she understood that sometimes, the greatest acts of courage emerge from the deepest wounds. The tension in the room crackled like static electricity as Margaret's words reverberated through the space. She could see the calculations playing across Mr. Thompson's face, the mental gymnastics required to process this seismic shift in power dynamics. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, his earlier confidence shattered like glass. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting between Margaret and the incriminating documents spread across her desk. "Our shareholders will want answers," Mr. Thompson finally stammered, grasping at straws. This changes everything." "It changes nothing," Margaret corrected him, her voice carrying the weight of conviction. "What changes things is how we choose to respond. Will we let fear dictate our actions? Or will we embrace this moment as an opportunity to redefine what leadership truly means?" She leaned forward, her elbows resting on the desk, creating an intimate space that demanded attention. "You've been operating under the assumption that power is about control. About numbers and titles. But real power, the kind that endures, is about influence. About trust. About earning the respect of those you lead." The youngest board member, a woman named Rachel who had always seemed particularly ambitious, spoke up hesitantly. "But the market is changing so quickly. We believed that younger perspectives might be better suited to navigate this new landscape." Margaret's expression softened slightly, recognizing the genuine concern beneath the clumsy justification. "Change is inevitable," she acknowledged. "But progress doesn't require erasure. Innovation doesn't demand amnesia. The trick is to blend experience with fresh ideas, to create a synergy that leverages the strengths of all generations. That's how you build sustainable success." She opened another drawer, retrieving a stack of reports and analysis documents. "Here's data showing how companies with diverse age representation consistently outperform their less diverse counterparts. Here's research demonstrating the value of institutional knowledge in crisis management. And here." She tapped a particular folder, are testimonials from employees across all departments, expressing their concerns about recent policy changes. The room fell silent as the gravity of her preparation sank in. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment defense, this was years of strategic foresight coming to fruition. Margaret had always known that knowledge was power, and she had armed herself accordingly. "What happens now?" asked Mr. Thompson, his voice barely above a whisper. The question carried multiple layers, immediate consequences, long-term strategy, personal accountability. That depends on you, Margaret replied, her tone firm but not unkind. We can approach this as adversaries, battling for control. Or we can view it as an opportunity to transform our corporate culture. To demonstrate that leadership isn't about age or tenure, but about vision and values. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. I propose we form a task force, equal representation from all levels of seniority, to evaluate our current trajectory and propose meaningful changes. Changes that honor our past while embracing our future. The suggestion hung in the air, challenging conventional wisdom and corporate hierarchy. Margaret could see the resistance mounting in some faces, the cautious optimism in others. Change was never easy, especially when it required acknowledging past mistakes. Consider this, she continued, her voice taking on a more personal tone. Every decision we make today affects tomorrow's workplace culture. The young professionals watching how we handle this situation, they're learning what leadership means. If we choose the path of least resistance, of maintaining the status quo through manipulation and power plays, that's what they'll carry forward. But if we demonstrate courage, integrity, and genuine concern for all stakeholders. Her words trailed off, allowing the implication to resonate. In that moment, she saw something shift in their eyes, not just fear or calculation, but understanding. The realization that this wasn't just about her position or theirs, but about setting a precedent that would ripple through the organization for years to come. I'm willing to stay, Margaret announced, surprising even herself with the declaration. Not because I need to prove anything, but because I believe in this company. In its potential to be better. To do better. But I won't stay on terms that compromise our values or undermine our people. She fixed each board member with a steady gaze. The question is, are you willing to evolve? To learn? To truly lead? The sunlight had shifted, casting long shadows across the room as afternoon approached. Margaret felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were observing herself from outside her body. Here she was, offering an olive branch after being served betrayal. Proposing collaboration after facing conspiracy. It was, she realized, the ultimate test of her principles, to rise above bitterness and choose the harder path of reconciliation. One condition, she added, her voice steel beneath velvet. Transparency. Complete disclosure about all restructuring plans and personnel decisions. No more closed-door meetings deciding people's futures without their input. No more sacrificing loyal employees for short-term gains. She tapped the shareholder documents with emphasis. As a significant stakeholder, I demand nothing less. The room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with unspoken agreements and reluctant acknowledgments. Margaret recognized the moment when power truly shifted, not through threats or ultimatums, but through the quiet strength of unwavering conviction. The board members exchanged glances, their earlier bravado replaced by something more substantial, respect. As discussions began in earnest, Margaret found herself moving seamlessly between roles, mentor, mediator, advocate. She challenged assumptions, presented data, shared stories of employees whose contributions had been overlooked in recent evaluations. With each passing minute, the dynamic in the room transformed from confrontation to collaboration, from defense to dialogue. Yet beneath the surface calm, emotions churned like storm clouds. Decades of suppressed frustration bubbled to the surface as Margaret listened to proposed solutions that reflected the very attitudes that had led to this crisis. She heard the subtle dismissals of older employees' contributions, the casual assumption that innovation belonged exclusively to youth. Each instance fueled her resolve to effect real change, not just superficial adjustments. This isn't just about me, she interjected during one particularly heated exchange about workforce demographics. Look at your retention rates among mid-career professionals. The burnout statistics. The number of promising employees who've walked away because they felt undervalued or overlooked. These aren't just numbers, they're people. Lives affected by every decision we make in this room. Her voice caught slightly on the last word, and she turned to stare out the window, composing herself. The city below bustled with activity, oblivious to the drama unfolding in this corporate tower. She thought of all the times she'd gazed out this same window, seeking inspiration or solace. Of the private moments when doubt had crept in, when the weight of responsibility had felt overwhelming. Those moments had forged her resilience, strengthened her resolve. Turning back to face the room, she saw something remarkable, not agreement, but engagement. The board members were arguing, yes, but they were listening too. Challenging each other, questioning assumptions, considering alternatives. It was messy and uncomfortable, but it was real. Authentic dialogue, not rehearsed presentations or predetermined outcomes. I remember when we implemented our first flexible work policy, she shared, redirecting the conversation. Many of you opposed it, citing productivity concerns. But the results spoke for themselves: increased efficiency, higher job satisfaction, better work-life balance. Why? Because we trusted our employees to manage their time responsibly. Because we valued their well-being alongside our bottom line. The parallels to their current situation were unmistakable, and she watched understanding dawn in their eyes. Leadership wasn't about controlling outcomes, it was about creating conditions where people could thrive, where their talents could shine brightest, regardless of age or tenure. As the afternoon wore on, Margaret found herself oscillating between moments of triumph and vulnerability. When Rachel suggested incorporating reverse mentoring programs, pairing seasoned professionals with younger colleagues, she felt a surge of pride in the idea's potential. When Mr. Thompson attempted to minimize the significance of her ownership stake, she experienced a flash of anger that took her breath away. Through it all, she maintained her composure, channeling her emotions into constructive dialogue. She drew upon every lesson learned during her 35 years, weaving personal anecdotes with strategic insights, historical context with forward-thinking proposals. The transformation in the room was palpable, from defensive posturing to genuine problem-solving, from hierarchical rigidity to collaborative exploration. Yet even as progress emerged, Margaret recognized the magnitude of the challenge ahead. Changing policies was relatively straightforward. Changing mindsets required patience, persistence, and courage. She thought of all the women who had paved the way before her, who had fought similar battles against invisible ceilings and institutional bias. Their voices echoed in her mind, lending strength to her resolve. "We need to redefine success," she declared during a lull in the discussion. "It's not just about profit margins or market share. It's about creating an environment where everyone can contribute meaningfully, where experience is valued alongside innovation, where loyalty is rewarded rather than exploited." She gestured to the documents spread across the table. "These aren't just business metrics, they're lives, dreams, potential." The sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the room in warm hues of orange and gold. Shadows lengthened, and the city lights began to twinkle like stars against the darkening horizon. Margaret felt the weight of the day settling into her bones, but also a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about salvaging her position or asserting her rights, it was about transforming an organization from within. About proving that leadership transcended age and tenure, that wisdom accumulated through experience was as valuable as fresh perspectives. As the meeting stretched into evening, with no clear conclusion in sight, Margaret realized she was exactly where she needed to be. Fighting not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been told they were too old, too set in their ways, too expensive to keep around. For every dream that had been crushed under the weight of corporate greed. For every voice that had been silenced by ambition. And in that moment of clarity, she understood that sometimes, the greatest acts of courage emerge from the deepest wounds. The room had grown dim, the city lights now fully ablaze outside the windows, casting a soft glow over the conference table. Margaret stood at the head of the room, her presence commanding yet calm, as the final pieces of the discussion fell into place. The air was no longer tense but charged with a different kind of energy, hopeful, determined, and alive with possibility. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine humility. "Margaret," he began, his voice steady but tinged with remorse, "I owe you an apology. All of us do." He glanced around the table, meeting the eyes of the other board members, who nodded in quiet agreement. "We've made mistakes, serious ones, and not just today. We've undervalued experience, dismissed loyalty, and prioritized short-term gains over long-term sustainability. That ends now." Margaret inclined her head slightly, acknowledging his words without interrupting. She knew apologies were only meaningful if followed by action, and she waited to see what would come next. Rachel, the youngest board member, spoke up, her tone earnest. "We need your guidance, not just for this transition, but for everything moving forward. You're right, leadership isn't about age or titles. It's about vision, integrity, and respect. And frankly, none of us have shown nearly enough of those qualities." A small smile tugged at the corners of Margaret's mouth. She could see the sincerity in their faces, the dawning realization that they had underestimated her, not just as a leader, but as a person. For decades, she had chosen to lead quietly, to let her work speak for itself. Now she understood the power of stepping forward, of claiming her rightful place not just as an owner, but as a mentor, a changemaker, and a force to be reckoned with. "Here's what we propose," Mr. Thompson continued, gesturing to a fresh document on the table. "You'll take an active role on the board, not just as a shareholder, but as a senior advisor. Your insights will guide every major decision going forward. We'll also implement immediate changes to our policies, transparency in restructuring, equal representation across generations in leadership roles, and initiatives to support mid-career professionals. No more dismissing people because they've been here too long." Margaret crossed her arms, considering their proposal. It wasn't perfect, there would still be resistance, still moments when old habits threatened to resurface, but it was a start. More importantly, it was a commitment to change, backed by concrete actions rather than empty promises. "I accept," she said finally, her voice clear and unwavering. "But understand this, I won't tolerate half measures or backsliding. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Every employee deserves to know their contributions matter, regardless of age or tenure. Every decision must align with our core values, not just our bottom line." The room erupted into murmurs of agreement, the tension dissolving into a shared sense of purpose. For the first time in hours, or perhaps years, Margaret felt a deep sense of peace. This wasn't just about reclaiming her position, it was about redefining what success looked like for everyone involved. As the meeting drew to a close, Rachel approached Margaret hesitantly, holding out a folder. "This is something we drafted while you were speaking earlier," she explained. "It's a proposal for a new mentorship program, pairing seasoned employees with younger ones, fostering collaboration instead of competition. We thought, well, we hoped you'd oversee it." Margaret took the folder, flipping through its contents. Her heart swelled with pride, not just for herself, but for the future of the company. These weren't just words on paper, they were seeds of transformation, planted in fertile ground. She nodded slowly, her eyes meeting Rachel's. "I'd be honored," she replied simply. Later that evening, as the last of the board members filed out of the office, Margaret lingered by the window, gazing out at the glittering cityscape. The weight of the day still rested heavily on her shoulders, but it no longer felt oppressive. Instead, it felt like responsibility, the kind that came with knowing you had the power to make a difference. Her phone buzzed softly on the desk, and she picked it up to find a text from Sarah, the young marketing manager she had mentored months ago. "Heard about today. So proud of you. You've always been our rock." Tears pricked at the corners of Margaret's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or regret. They were tears of gratitude, for the journey, for the lessons, and for the opportunity to rewrite the ending she had once feared. She typed a quick reply, "Thank you, Sarah. But remember this, strength isn't about never falling, it's about getting back up. Together, we'll build something better." As she turned off the lights and locked the door behind her, Margaret knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was a new beginning, one filled with challenges, yes, but also with hope, resilience, and the unshakable belief that change was possible. After 35 years of dedication, she hadn't just earned her place at the table. She had earned the right to set it, to ensure that everyone had a seat, and a voice. And as she walked away, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor, she carried with her not just the weight of her years, but the promise of a brighter tomorrow.